Welcome, everyone, to we're trying something new today, the Land of 10 Iowa Facebook Live Top 25 College Football Playoff. Basically, live, the Facebook Live version of a live blog. If we can mix kind of metaphors across various different internet options here. But what we're doing is I'll be on here live during the playoff announcement as it goes so we can kind of discuss it, talk about it, break things down in real time. So also I'm Bobby La Gesse with Land of 10. Don't know if I said that in the first intro. The only room I have to do this in right now is not the best. There's no TV in here. So I've got a second screen set up to my right to keep track of everything, to see when Iowa gets ranked, if Iowa gets ranked after that big upset of Ohio State. So don't be shocked if I keep looking off to the side a little bit. It's just me trying to make sense of everything and see what's going on. And also, if you see Iowa in the rankings, be sure, put them in the comments so we can see it and we can discuss it from there. As always, if you have questions, concerns, comments, anything, just, throw them in. We'll have the conversation like always, and we'll discuss the college football playoff as it all happens. In about a minute here, Iowa will find out if they're in the college football playoff or not. The show starts at 6 o'clock, and if Iowa's in the rankings, they'll probably be ranked 20 to 25. They'll come in right away, and those are the rankings that show up first all the time. So it shouldn't be too long for us to find out if that happens or not. And before that starts, we've still got about a minute or so before that show starts. Want to hit one question that popped up to me when I announced that we were doing this, and that was, I forget who asked it, so I apologize if they're on here, but I had a question about Jack Hockaday and kind of what his status was, because he suffered an injury early in camp, and wondered if a red shirt would be possible for him. He's already played 5 games this year, and he has a few tackles, so I think the red shirt's off the table. I think I was using him primarily on special teams, and the possibility of him being somebody to replace what is a position group that will lose all 3 starters next year is still there. But, yeah, the red shirt's off the table. Todd wants to know about Iowa health-wise. Bad news today for Brandon Snyder on the injury front. He will undergo surgery at some point this week. Kirk Ferentz didn't say when, but he retore his same ACL, the left ACL, and will be out, Kirk said, until June on there. So that's tough. Kid came back quickly from the rehab. Initially injured it in April in spring practice. Hurried back in a few months, quicker than normal rehab time. And then he was here and played one game against Illinois, had a pick 6 for a touchdown, and that was his season. Kirk Ferentz said, Iowa would do everything again with him if they could do it over again. His rehab was fast, but he still felt they were conservative, and he passed every marker going the whole way through. And he might have done that, but I don't know. It still seems so fast to me simply because those players don't respond and recover that quick. It might have been fine. It might have just been, hey, it's a fluke thing. It happens again. Some people get hurt, and the first one has nothing to do with the second. But because it happened in the first game back, and because he got back so quick, I think it's something that'll have the Iowa medical staff alone, and probably the football staff will, say go for it with them to figure out if there was anything they could have changed or done differently from that, especially with go back when the season's over and look for it then, and just see if there's anything that could change that might be helpful there. So it seems like the show started just from what I can see off Twitter. So that's good to know. We should figure that out, what's happening with the team shortly. And to get back to Todd, that was really the only big thing. He says that anybody else that got dinged up should be fine for this game. Nathan Budget is the big name I think of that jumps out for me, simply because we know he went down during the course of the game. They thought he'd be healthy afterwards. He spoke to the media afterwards, so I don't think there's too much to go down with that. Tim wants to know if there is any news with Wagner. He was at the game on Saturday. He stormed the field. He actually was an attendee at the Michigan game last year, so he's caught the 2 best games that Iowa can put forward on that. So it's not bad news to see a recruit end up at, your biggest game, you prefer that over a game where you end up losing. I don't know if it's ever the number one factor for a kid when they go through the recruiting processes. Hey, I was at game X where this team upset a major team, fans stormed the field, and I remember that experience, though it is something kids do remember. I believe the number was 8 kids who ended up in Iowa's recruiting class for the class of 2017. All were at the game, and they all mentioned it to me. I talked to 6 of the 8 at some point between before them signing and after them signing, and they remember it made an impression on them. It just, it wasn't the number one thing. We have Marcus in here saying Oliver Martin was at that game too. Yeah, you don't land everybody that's at those games. And of all the players who were in the class last year, Henry Marquez was the only one who wasn't previously committed. Through there, where you can see the impact showing up the most is in future years. I know a lot of you know I covered Iowa State for almost a decade before switching to Iowa, and I covered that big Oklahoma State win they have, which I think was in 2011, and there was kids from 3 classes that impacted. The 2012 one had a little bit, but I talked to more kids in 13 and 14 who mentioned that game in particular and the impact it had on their recruitment than the class that signed a few months after that game. And you're already seeing something similar happen with the Michigan game, because I think there's already 4 kids who are committed in the 18 class who are at that game. So I think Wagner was at the game. He's the biggest recruiting chip that could fall from the Ohio State game this year. But I think you'll see more in 19 and 20 potentially from some of the kids who were there. Yeah, Joe comes back in and says, how's Wisconsin injuries update? I know the running back was a concern to maybe play with, I think it was his ankle, but whatever it was, they came out today in Wisconsin and said he should be good to go. It looks like they still haven't gotten to the rankings yet on the show. A little bit, because I haven't seen anything scrolling with the top 25 numbers. So just as a reminder, if anybody has the TV on too while taking part of this, feel free to type in what happens if Iowa ends up probably 20 to 25 is where they will end up. And, their ranking really comes down to for them. Is the Ohio State win enough to get them in? That's what it's going to come. That's really what it's going to come down to. That win, they manhandled Ohio State. That was surprising. I think everybody with the way that they just dominated that game. They're 6-3. The Iowa State win helps them. That's another team that should be ranked in the top 25 for the college poll this week. But it's that Ohio State win that really, if the committee really loved that, that'll put them into the top 25. Kind of like you saw with the saw that, and we get the top 25. Northwestern is number 25 in the poll, surprising. LSU 24, NC State 23, Memphis 22, and Iowa State in there at 21. Iowa coming in at number 20. Going to be honest, the first text I saw, the first tweet I saw had them only showed the bottom 5 teams. I didn't think Iowa was going to get in there. I figured they would be 21 through 25. So there you go. Iowa in there at number 20, which is a little bit of a surprising number for me. Thank you everybody for throwing that in there. Yeah, I figured it'd be 21 to 25, a little bit there. Also get some Cyhawk bragging rights right over Iowa State. Wouldn't be surprised that if the committee talks about it, they put Iowa above Iowa State simply because they beat them earlier this year. So there you go. They haven't, I think, shown Ohio State yet. I could be wrong. I missed that. I might have missed it if it came through. But that's 2 wins for Iowa against top 25 teams in the college football playoff poll. You'll have 2 other games that are losses in there with Penn State and Michigan State, who I imagine will both be in the top 25 somewhere for both of them. And then you'll have the game against Wisconsin, who will be sitting somewhere in the top 10 coming up this week. So, that's a good number for Iowa. And the interesting thing is with that, they can climb higher over the next several weeks. The big one is the Wisconsin game this week. If you beat them, that's another notch on the resume right there. Almost as good, maybe better than Ohio State, just because that's the one team left in the Big Ten for the rankings. Or to make the playoffs. So you beat 2 consecutive top 10 teams, that can vault you up. And then the Purdue and Nebraska games, getting the wins will help. Not losing those games, you won't fall down the rankings, but it'll help you maintain wherever your status is. and winning those last two games, how high you jump will be dependent on who loses probably in front of you. But Wisconsin's really the last game in the regular season here for Iowa to make a big jump. And thanks, Wayne, for chiming in saying Michigan State's 12, Ohio State is 13, and Penn State is 14. I think that shows what a lot of people are thinking is that Wisconsin is the best hope for the Big Ten to get a playoff team. Run their schedule, which would have to require a win against Iowa, and then win the conference title is your best hope, because the rest of those teams are all sitting down there in the team. 3 weeks left in the regular season. There's a lot left to happen. Michigan State could run the table and make an interesting case as a 2-loss team, I think, to get in there. But that's a whole other story. But to get back to Iowa, first time in a long time. I think they made the first poll or two last season in the college football playoff to get in. We're in there all throughout 2015. And so if there's a poll you want to be in, this is the one to be in, because this is the only one that matters now. The AP poll and the coaches poll is kind of a lot like basketball, where it really doesn't matter. You can argue about it if you want, but that's really it, because it has no bearing on who wins the national title because of the NCAA tournament there. Now you have this college football playoff poll. The teams that are in the top 4 here are the ones that make the playoffs. And then where your rankings are dictates some other things that could happen, like the Group of 5 team making the major bowl and some other stuff. But this is the only one that matters. So it's good for Iowa to be in this one. As always, a reminder, any questions you have about the poll, about the rankings, about Iowa in general, be sure to just dump them in. We can go over them here through. This one's kind of serving a dual purpose, the typical Facebook Live session we have every week, and then also, working in the college football playoff ranking with it, which Iowa is number 20. So Brady wants to know off topic, do I think Stanley's ceiling is higher than any other QB in recent years? I will say yes on that. I will also say most of those recent QBs in recent years, with the exception of C.J. Beathard, I covered from Iowa State. So I wasn't here on a day-to-day basis covering them. I would see them in person one game a year, and watch a bunch of games on TV like most people in the state, catch a little bit of the team on the other side of the rivalry. But yeah, his arm strength is phenomenal. His decision-making is amazing. He rarely makes a wrong decision. And his accuracy is as good, or if not better, than his decision-making. And from talking to coaches for a long time, the decision-making and the accuracy are two things that coaches really can't teach. For the most part, guys have it, especially with accuracy. The decision-making you can work on with guys, but if somebody already starts off at a really good spot, like Nate does, you've hit some of the toughest parts that it takes for a quarterback to be a good quarterback. They're already there. That's part of his baseline. So it's only going to get better with him. And I think this week was a big jumping out point for him. A lot of the guys after the game said they felt the same way with him, that Nate was more, I guess, kind of himself in the huddle. He said he had more fun in this game with Ohio State, and it showed up in his play, and it allowed him to play. So it's kind of one big circle there. Having fun resulted in fun play and better production from him. Guy said he was smiling more, a little bit more jovial, a little bit in the huddle. He is an introvert, so it's not like it wouldn't be the equivalent of Akram Wadley doing stuff. But they thought there was something there. I think when you look back on it, Nate, in a couple of years, I think you'll say this was the game that really took him to the point where you could argue this year he's the third best quarterback in the league behind McSorley and the guy at Ohio State, JT. But coming up down, the next couple of years, you could find a spot where you're arguing he's the best guy in the league. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. Wisconsin came in at number 8. Thank you, Wayne, for saying that. So Iowa beat the number 6 team in the college football playoff ranking last week in Ohio State. This week they will get number 8. Wisconsin, sounds about right. Figure they'd end up maybe 7 or 8. Wisconsin's going to need some teams to lose in front of them and run the table to really have a shot at making that 14 playoff for them. Winning the Big Ten title will give them a bump. The teams have shown that in the past, or the committee has shown that in the past, that a team who wins a conference title, they might bump over a team that doesn't. So if there's only one or two teams between them at the end for Wisconsin, that might help them if that team isn't in position to win its conference title, but they will need some help. Ben wants to know, Wisconsin will run the ball 30 times this week. That's going to be tough. Hope the Hawkeyes have the stamina in the fourth quarter. Iowa, Wisconsin, you know what this game's going to be every week. It's it's kind of like a backyard brawl or a bar brawl with two guys that just want to slug at each other. They're two boxers that have a good chin, and they're not going to go to the canvas. It's going to be smash mouth football. It's going to be won or lost on the line of scrimmage. They're both going to try to run the ball. Yeah, Iowa's passing the ball more right now, but so much of their offense is dictated on the run game. They do want that balance. That this game comes down to the rushing attack. I'm going to have a story up on our website on Thursday that kind of details this, but an interesting fact, and I don't think it should surprise anybody, is since these two teams have started playing each other again every year after they realigned the divisions and everything in 2013, the team that has rushed for the most yards has won. And that it's not really going to surprise you, but it just kind of hones in on the fact that Iowa needs to have a repeat of that rushing performance they had this past week against Ohio State. Wisconsin is as good of a run defense as Ohio State. They're number 4 in the country. They allowed 87 yards per game. Ohio State was coming in the same way. Their defensive line just destroyed Penn State and Saquon Barkley. It didn't look like there'd be an opening there, and Iowa found a way to create lanes in the rushing game to go for 200-plus yards. They're going to have to do the same kind of thing with Wisconsin. I don't know if rushing for 230 is going to be the number that you should have attainable, but they're definitely going to have to go for north than 100. They're going to have to run for, ideally, you want them more than 4 yards per carry. You might be able to win it with 3.8 if, it's defensive struggle, which it looks like it will be because both defenses are really good. That's kind of the way I think the prediction for this game is going to go. But, yeah, it's going to be running, and if Iowa can stop the run, that's their best shot to probably win this game. Marcus says Iowa should play Wisconsin the way teams have been playing Iowa on defense. Coming at them straight with the blitz, loading up the box is not a bad strategy against this team. They want to run the ball in Wisconsin. That's how they want to do it. They average, they're top 20 in the country on a rushing offense. So they're kind of like Iowa in a lot of years where when things go right for them, they can still overcome 8 guys in the box to move the ball. But no, that's what I would do. There's some injuries at wide receiver there. I would make them pass it. And then, once they prove that they can do that, all of a sudden have them, then you adjust if you have to. Jake says should be a good game next week. Just hopes Iowa can carry some of what they did last week going forward with the offensive line. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that, and I think the coaching staff and players know the same thing. That was a question that they were asked. Do they think it's repeatable? Is this something that can go? And kind of the general consensus is it's kind of the expectation is they should start off where they left off this past week and see where they can go from there because they've been waiting. Everybody in the offensive line, the fullbacks and the running backs, anybody who's a part of the running game has said for several weeks that it was always one thing that kind of got in the way. It was missed block here. It was maybe the running back didn't, make a guy miss on a tackle, juke him, and that happened. Maybe a 1-yard run or a 2-yard run from becoming a 5-yard run or a 7-yard run or an 8-yard run. So that's something else to keep in mind. And Brady has another question is, do I think there'll be a letdown coming off an emotional game? That's a tough one to read, especially since we don't get to see the team at practice. We get them for part of late morning, early afternoon on Tuesdays for media availability. It's hard to gauge any of that. Everybody said the right things. Everybody always says the right things. Ohio State said the right things last week, and then Iowa just hit them in the mouth, and they didn't have an answer for it. So that's something. It's hard to say. We'll find out for sure on Saturday. But Kirk Ferentz didn't say anything today about not liking the way practice has gone early in the week. Which, if he doesn't like it, he will kind of get an indication on that. So I think that's a good sign. That. They might not be too worried about this. Blake says he's happy that Iowa's ranked. I think that sums up things for the entire fan base. And Scott wants to know if Iowa runs the table, what bowl game are you looking at? A little bit of that will be dependent on what happens with some other teams across the league. But if you run the table, odds are you're second in the West. Iowa can still win the West if Wisconsin loses out and Northwestern loses a game. But with Wisconsin's schedule, I don't think that's likely going to happen. But you'll be second in the West. You'll be sitting at 9 wins. I think a January bowl game is definitely in play at that point. It'll depend a little bit on what happens with everybody else. But I wouldn't be surprised if they run the table if that was the scenario that played out for them. Marcus says, why should 100 yards be difficult if they have to unload the box to cover the tight ends? Marcus, if you can come back with me on that, you talked about 100 rushing yards there. I just want to make sure that before I get into answering the question, if you just be a little bit more specific, I would appreciate that. Matt says, how in the world after being Ohio State that bad with the injuries is Iowa a 12.5-point underdog. You're on the road. Madison's a tough place to play, just like Kinnick is. And the way part of this is it's the line set to ensure that the betting money is put on each side 50-50 or as close as they can so the Vegas house can take the vig. And so you got to put it at a high enough number to ensure that happens for them. So that's that. The other thing is this Wisconsin team is pretty good. The advanced stats likes them. I know they haven't played a great team yet, so some people have a hard time saying a team is great if they haven't played great competition and they've let some teams hang around with them. But the advanced stats do kind of like this team a little bit. And so it's a good team that can run the ball. I think part of it is they want to see Iowa prove that they can do this more than once, which I think is a legitimate question on that, simply because they were inconsistent for most of the season. They put together a great game against Ohio State. Now, can they do that again? So I think that's a little bit thick. That's a little bit of it. You know, I figured it probably would have been around 10 points. So 12.5 is a little bit off, a lot more of that. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me too much for that. Blake wants to know what time for the Purdue game. We don't know yet. The Big 10, said every game for the week before Thanksgiving is going to be a 6-day window. Nothing's getting set up before then, so nobody across the league knows it. We'll find out late Saturday once all the Big Ten games are over or close to being over, or we'll find out early Sunday morning on that. Wayne says Georgia's number 1, Alabama's number 2, Notre Dame number 3, Clemson's 4, Oklahoma 5, and TCU 6. I don't think that should surprise too many people, just with the way everything played out this week. They were sitting there last week. Good shot at 2 teams from the SEC getting in. Notre Dame's got a good shot if it runs the table, and it's the same way with that TCU Oklahoma winner from when they meet up, and with Clemson. Colleen says Josh Jackson's the 2, and Stanley is the 5. 25. Both those players had huge games this past week, and Josh Jackson's playing his way into the discussion for the NFL draft. I know it was a week or two ago. Mel Kiper had him in his top 10 draft-eligible cornerbacks, and after that big game this past week with 3 interceptions, more people are going to hop on that bandwagon a little bit. I think it was Pro Football Focus had him as first-round draft pick last week. Came out, I think, on Thursday or Wednesday before the game happened. I don't think you'll see him moving off of there. It'll be an interesting decision for Josh because he's got the size at, I think he's 6'1", maybe 6'2", that the NFL teams like. He's tall, he's lanky. Those cornerbacks are in vogue right now. And he's shown the ability to break on the ball, read passes, and make plays when the ball comes to him. He leads the nation in passes defended. He has all those interceptions from this week at Ohio State. NFL teams are going to like. He might have a really difficult decision for him when the season ends. Jake says he wouldn't call the Ohio State one emotional because Iowa outplayed them, and if Iowa would have beaten Penn State, you would have used emotional there. I think you still can use it because it's a big win. The way the players celebrated after the game showed plenty of emotion, and it mattered for them to beat that kind of team. I don't think an emotional win, how badly you beat them in, ties into it. Yeah, there's a different level to it when it's something like that Penn State win where it was so close. That does add a little bit of something for the fans and the players too. But still beating a team that was 3 people and 6 in the playoff poll. That matters, and there's an emotional stake into it for everybody involved. Gary says Ohio State made a lot of mistakes that worked in our favor. Obviously, mistakes that Wisconsin made that you can recall. First, let me hit off that game. Ohio State made some mistakes, but Iowa just straight up outplayed them. It didn't matter about the mistakes they made. You could argue the first interception, that 30-yard touchdown return by Hooker, let Iowa know they could play with them in that game. But the second running play of that game went for 30 yards on Akron Wadley. James Daniel on the offensive line told me he knew that they were going to win that matchup by the end of the first series. Iowa outplayed them. The mistakes didn't matter. Iowa was winning that game regardless. The mistakes helped ensure a little bit that Iowa was able to win by the margin it did. But Iowa, they outplayed them. Iowa won that game just straight up. But to go to Wisconsin, they've had a tendency to kind of let teams hang around with them and then pull away a little bit late in the second half. Frankly, it's the same thing you've seen some Iowa teams. People call Iowa teams for that, but they're both teams that historically are designed to kind of wear you down and win games in the fourth quarter. So part of that is what Wisconsin wants to do, but part of that is if you're a team that's pretty good and I think right now Iowa can qualify for that as being a top 25 team in 2 of the 3 polls that you look at. If you're able to get a lead on them, and with Iowa's defense can ensure that they don't move the ball too much, that might be an issue that I don't know if they can overcome. Early in the season, one of the questions I had is what would Nate Stanley do if Iowa was in a position where a team got up on them 2 scores and they had to throw the ball? They couldn't rely on what they thought was going to be the strength of the run game. Nate Stanley answered that at the Iowa State game and went and won that game in the 4th quarter for him. Wisconsin still has to show if they can make enough offensive plays when they fall down by maybe 14 or 17 to a quality opponent if they can do that. Doesn't mean they can't, but because they haven't done it, I think that's something if you're Iowa, you'd love to find out if you could do that with them. We have Brian Long saying, Cam the silly on the fence. Iowa fans finally stop with the Ferentz nonsense when things go a bit south. The short answer is no. That's just part of the Iowa fan base. Things are really, really great when the team wins and a lot of the fans go over the top. And then when things are bad, it'll go back to fire Ferentz. If they lose their next 2 games, that crew will pop back up again. It's just part of the fan base and the way it is. I don't really have an answer on how to make that stop. That's just kind of part of what being an Iowa fan means. I don't want to say you have to put up with, but just that part of the contingent is kind of out there. And that's, it's just part of it. It's the way it is. And that's the way it's going to be, because just some of the fans think it's not a successful season unless Kirk Ferentz has a Big Ten title shot, or he has 10 wins, or he has something like that Ohio State win from last week. And that's just what happens when you have nearly 20 years of success at the level that he's had. I don't think that's necessarily right, and I don't think Brian does either with his response. I don't think most of the fan base does, but for part of the fan base, that's kind of their definition of success. Brady wants to know if we have a podcast. And thank you. He follows that up with, if not, you should. I appreciate that. It's something me and Scott have talked to our bosses in Atlanta, to our Cox Media Group, kind of corporate offices are. They're working on doing things to get a podcast for us, but it's kind of out of our hands. And how soon it comes up and, if and when is all on them. I know we've talked about it. They're working on something. There have been some delays on their end on getting it done. It's something we do want to do with having a podcast. I had one when I worked at the Ames Tribune for years. I had a blast doing. Scott had one when we worked at the Cedar Rapids Gazette that he had a blast doing. And it's something we really would like to do going forward. But, kind of the rolling out of that and some of the behind-the-scenes stuff to ensure that it happens is at a level that's kind of above our pay grade a little bit. So when we have more info on that, we'll be sure to pass it along to you, Brady, because you're not the first one that's asked us about it, and it's something we really would like to do. We just haven't been in the spot yet, have things set up on our end for us to be able to do it. So if anybody has any more final questions here, throw them in, because we've run through everything, and it looks like we're getting towards the end of this Facebook Live session. So, Iowa, second straight week against a top 10 opponent. I don't think it's a surprise for anybody with Wisconsin. This game should be fun. It's kind of the Big Ten college version of those Pittsburgh-Baltimore games when both of those teams were really good, Super Bowl title contenders every year, earlier this decade. It's going to be defense. There's going to be hitting. It's going to be running the ball. Odds are it's going to be low scoring. It's a different kind of football than you get from most games. And it's good to have one of those every once in a while. Ben comes in. The Iowa O-line looked like light years better against Ohio State. Need that again this week. Stop the run. Force Stony Brook to pass. So Hawks, Madison's tough, but we've won there before, one game at a time. Yeah, the road team was winning, I think it's like 6 games in a row in this series. So, being on the road isn't a detriment to either team, and he laid out a lot of what I would say for this. Stop the run, force the QB to pass. If you can establish the run for Iowa, that'll help you. The wild card will be Iowa's deep passing game. If they can connect on a few of those, they had a boatload of 20-plus yard passing plays against Ohio State. That can help you too. That's the way it goes. David, good to see you watching, buddy. Good to see you as always popping on. Gary says predictions. My prediction for the game, kind of gives you there. I think it's going to be low scoring for that. We have our story that we put up every Friday that has our predictions. I haven't done enough research yet on that to have the true one, so I'm not dodging the question. We'll have a story that posts on Friday with 3 keys in our predictions. I'm telling you right now, I'm going low scoring. I'm going close, and I'm not done with my research yet to go which way it is. It'll probably dictate on which I think we'll be able to run the ball better. But that's what I'll decide, I think. Jeff says, sorry if we were asked, he just got on. With Wisconsin not playing anybody yet, do you feel they're overrated and a team that we should beat? I think it's a team Iowa can beat just because the way these two teams are, the styles of play, it tends to lead themselves to close games. I don't think they're too overrated. I think the college football playoff committee puts them in about the right spot. 7 or 8 is probably right for them because they haven't been tested. I can see you putting other teams in front of them because they have higher quality wins. I don't think not playing a great team can exclude you from being a great team, but it makes it harder a little bit to judge you. I know the advanced stats likes this team a little bit, so I tend to decide that I think this is a top team for sure. With the way they've kind of played, they might be exposed a little bit. It might be a top 15 team by the time things are all said and done, once they get done playing some better competition. But no, I have no problem with them being, ranked where they are. And I think it's a team with Iowa. If you saw what they played last week, it's a team you think you should have a shot with, even though they are made. I think it was 12-point underdog. Somebody put up there a little bit earlier. I think you should like your shot. Stop their run the ball, and you should be in a pretty good spot for that. And Jake says, does Iowa try to keep the pass moving forward? They do go back to run heavy because you're playing Wisconsin. That's a great question. It's one for Brian Ferentz. My gut tells me they're going to try to pass a little bit more than they have in years past, simply because Nate's played so well, he looks so well, and all of the best thing Wisconsin does is stop the run. So they're not going to abandon it completely, but I think you might see a little bit of what you saw this past week where they passed a little bit on first down, and whether that's 5 or 6 yard plays to kind of set up to move the chains or some shots downfield. I think they'll let Nate Stanley go a little bit here to try to move the ball. And it worked for them last week, passing to set up the run a little bit. It's worked for them a little bit. I know the Ohio State game that kind of said they needed to take their shots downfield and kind of play that style of football. I wouldn't be surprised if they do the same thing this week. That doesn't mean they're not going to use the running game to win. They use the run game to kind of run things out there in the second half, run down the minutes, and ensure the victory. They pass to kind of get the points. And I've said this before, it's kind of like an NFL style. Throw to score, run to then win the game in the second half, move the chains, chew up the clock. I think the same thing could be in play for them this weekend. In order to do that, especially with the run game component, you have to be able to move the ball a little bit. So yeah, that's everything. Thanks everybody for taking part in this Facebook Live session. Hope you enjoyed the live coverage of the top 25 playoffs and answering all your questions with everything else. So we'll see you on Saturday from Madison. Before the kickoff, we'll have the team entrance walking in, and we'll do the Facebook Live session a few minutes, about 30 minutes or so before kickoff. So thanks everybody. Have a good night.